Welcome to the Operator's Guide to the Henry Repeating Rifle. The goal of this video is to teach you how to use your Henry repeating rifle in the most efficient way. Whether your goals are for home defense, self-defense, recreation, or competition, this video will teach you how to leverage this rifle to the best of its capabilities. First, an introduction. The lever action in the Henry rifle actually was preceded by a different design called the Volcanic. The Volcanic used what was called rocket ball ammunition. The hollow base of that projectile was filled with propellant and a primer, and therefore did not have a case. It was indeed caseless ammunition. The primer was struck, the propellant within the hollow base of the bullet would propel the projectile down the barrel. The amount of volume for capacity of propellant within the hollow base of the bullet was quite minimal, and therefore the round was anemic. Along came the 44 Henry rimfire, which allowed for 28 grains of black powder with a 200 grain projectile, which would go down the barrel of a Henry rifle at 1,150 feet per second. This was significantly better than the Volcanic rocket ball ammunition, and really was the first intermediate cartridge of its type. This, of course, was introduced in the year of 1860 and was a repeating rifle that held 16+1 rounds in a tubular fed magazine, and it changed the course of warfare. It was an intermediate cartridge that only was really effective to 200 yards. However, when you compare it to single-shot rifles or muzzleloaders of the time, the fire capabilities of this gun to suppress the enemy and get a hit within those 200 yards was unsurpassed. First, let's discuss the basic system and function of the rifle. This is a lever-action rifle, in that you have to run this lever each and every time for every round you wish to fire. Running this lever does a number of things within the gun. As you run the lever down, the bolt runs to the rear and cocks the hammer. The lifter actually comes from in line with the tubular magazine below the barrel, lifting a round in line with the chamber of the barrel. Closing the lever closes the bolt, which pushes a round into the chamber of the barrel, drops the lifter out of the way. The gun is now in battery based on the system within the action, which we will show later. Pulling the trigger, drops the hammer onto the firing pin, firing the round. Opening the action or running the lever again repeats that process. The bolt retreats to the rear with an extractor on the top. The lifter acts and does two things. It lifts another round in line with the chamber, but it also acts as the ejector of the spent and fired case. The case ejects through the top, a round is brought back in line with the chamber, closing the lever, puts that round into the chamber, the lifter drops out of the way, pulling the trigger, fires that round. This process can be repeated until the tubular magazine is out of ammunition. The Henry rifle loads from the front of the tubular magazine. This is the follower that pushes the rounds down the tubular magazine onto the lifter during the cycling of the action. To load the Henry rifle, you bring the lifter all the way to the top and then turn, which turns a sleeve that's actually around the barrel of the gun. This opens up the tubular magazine, allowing you to insert rounds down into the tubular magazine manually. You should be aware that you do not want to drop them at a 90-degree angle like this. The first round is safe, but subsequent ones actually cause the primer of the round being dropped into the tubular magazine to strike the nose of the bullet already in the tubular magazine. In an emergency, you could do this. However, it is not recommended. It is possible with a high primer or a particularly sensitive primer for a round to detonate in the tubular magazine during the loading process. What is recommended is to keep the gun at approximately a 45-degree angle and then push the rounds down the tube as such. This will not cause a detonation. There is not enough force being exerted upon the primer to cause it to detonate. Once you have sufficient amount of rounds, or many rounds you want to put into the magazine, whether full or a smaller amount, you then take the plunger with your thumb, bring it back in line with the tubular magazine, and then lower it softly upon the rounds. You do not drop it upon the force of the spring upon the rounds that are in the tubular magazine, because that once again impinges force upon the rounds that are in line with one another and can cause a primer detonation. So once again, when you are done putting the rounds into your tubular magazine, you will take the follower, put it in line with the tubular magazine, and lower it slowly upon the rounds, allowing the spring to impinge upon these, and when running the action, a round will then go into the lifter and cycle as we discussed earlier in the video. To unload the Henry rifle, perhaps you are done and do not wish to expend the rounds that are in your tubular magazine, the process is reversed. Bring the follower up, turn the sleeve on the barrel, merely dump the rifle at a 45-degree angle, and the rounds will actually leave the action, the tubular magazine. To ensure that there are none in the gun, open it up, visually inspect by looking at the lifter, the bolt, and the chamber area. Close it, bring the hammer down lightly. After visually identifying that there's nothing in the system, take the lifter, and then return the gun and the spring to its uncompressed state. This is the way you would store the gun normally when it's not loaded. There are times where you don't have time to load all 13 rounds into the tube. Perhaps you're under the clock, perhaps it's a stressful situation. In those situations where you need to load a round into the chamber as fast as possible, this can be done without loading from the actual tubular magazine. By running the actual lever back, not all the way, you can actually open the bolt without impinging upon the lifter itself. This exposes the chamber. In doing so, you can take a round off of your belt or wherever you have it, merely drop it into the chamber as though it was a single feed rifle, and then just close the bolt. Firing the gun by pulling the trigger will then fire that one single round, and you can open this by just merely bringing the lever back, eject it by doing it forcefully, bring it back, open the bolt again, exposing the chamber for another single feed. This should only be done in an emergency situation. However, it is faster than necessarily opening up and loading the chamber or the tube directly. This off. Also may be necessary to be done in certain situations where you're prone. You do not want to expose your head over a parapet or over a dirt berm. To do so, you need to bring the gun back and do that from here. You can always just open the bolt, single feed the action, close the bolt, and then fire the gun. The exposed follower underneath the tube of the magazine is both a detriment and a benefit, in that you can visually identify the amount of rounds you have left in the gun by merely looking underneath and seeing where the follower is in relation to the front or rear of the tubular magazine. You will see, as you cycle rounds through the gun, that follower moves with each round fired or expended. When you get to the rear of the receiver, this means you are out of ammunition. This is an indicator that you're getting close or out of ammunition. There is a benefit and a detriment to that. Of course, this is an exposed area, meaning that dirt and filth can get into the action of the gun. The other issue is that you actually have to perform something called the Henry hop. So as I'm cycling the gun, you'll see that follower is now impinging upon the front of my left hand. As I keep doing this, I have now prevented the gun from actually feeding rounds into the lifter and therefore the chamber. For this to start working again, I have to move my hand out of the way to allow the spring to apply pressure to the rounds in the tubular magazine, and the gun will now once again cycle. Let's go through the safeties based on the Henry rifle. There are a number of them. The first one would be to strictly load the actual tubular magazine but not put a round in the chamber. Carrying it in this condition means that you have no round in the chamber, essentially condition 3. If you need the gun quickly, and right now, you merely run the action, that will cycle around into the chamber and you're ready to fire. This is a very quick action when coming to the shoulder. This is the safest and probably best ready condition for you to have your rifle in. If you feel that contact is imminent and you know that you're going to need the rifle even faster than that, you could put a round into the chamber and then carefully decock the hammer to what is half cock. You can see on the video that the hammer is not touching the firing pin, and it is held by a sear engagement inside the action of the gun. This is theoretically safe. However, if you were to drop the rifle on the hammer, it is possible for this hammer to drop on the firing pin and fire the round in the chamber. So do this only in the most important situations. In this instance, you don't need to run the action. You merely bring the gun up, cock the hammer, and it's ready to go. Not that much faster than just really running the action, but it is quicker, and you can just cock the hammer and go. So those are your two most common ready conditions. The most safe ready condition would be to lock the lever of the gun with this rear screw. This means the lever cannot be cycled. This means a round cannot be fed into the gun accidentally. If there is a round in the chamber, however, it could still be fired. This only locks the lever, which prevents the action from being cycled and putting a round into the chamber. So you need to engage that safety and ensuring that you have a clear chamber before doing so. To re-enable the action, you turn the screw, which frees the lever, allowing the gun to be cycled normally. Sighting and zeroing your Henry repeating rifle. You have a rear sight and a front sight. The front sight is fixed. The only thing you can do with the front sight is lower it from its height to change your elevation zero. The rear sight isn't a dovetail. It can be drifted left and right for windage. Typically speaking, you will use the combat zero, which is the sight that is just down when the leaf is folded. It does have the ability to be folded upwards, and there is a slider that allows you to change elevation here by sliding it up and down. It should be noted, however, that any of the cartridges you're going to be firing in an 1860 Henry repeater, be it 45 Colt, 4440, or something else, really is not effective for aim fire beyond 200 yards or 200 meters. 100 meters is even more realistic. Therefore, this leaf sight is of dubious value. I recommend leaving it down and not worrying about it. What you should do is get your elevation zero based on this rear notch in this battle sight zero by taking it out at the range, I believe at 100 yards, given that these are pistol caliber cartridges, and zeroing your elevation by putting a black mark on the front sight until that black mark aligns with your elevation zero, and then actually cutting the front sight down to shorten it, thus raising your elevation until you have what is satisfactory to the cartridge you are going to be shooting with the bullet weight and velocity of your loading. As for windage, you merely drift this rear sight left or right based on your windage needs. Drifting the sight to the left will move the impact of your bullet to the left. Drifting the rear sight to the right will move your bullet impact to the right. Once you have gotten your windage zero correct, what you should then do is then peen the rear of the sight in a number of locations so that it cannot be moved accidentally in any other situation, being bumped, held improperly, or dropped. It should be noted that with cartridges such as 45 Colt and 44 Henry, that it is possible to do something called volley fire. By doing a very long range shot with your elevation, you're actually rainbow arcing the bullet like this. This means that you could actually leverage a type of tactic that's almost never used, in that you can drop bullets behind cover. It's a very advanced tactic. The Indians used it with bows and arrows. They also did use it with low power cartridges such as the 44 Henry. Something that's a high power cartridge does not have enough of a rainbow trajectory to drop behind cover, but something like this with volley fire, held at an extreme angle, means you can drop bullets behind cover, if you know the distance you're engaging at. Again, a very advanced tactic, really only for the most elite Henry user. As you can see, the sight picture is much like a modern day pistol. Notch and post. Nothing different there. Here's your volley sight as discussed. Lifted to different elevations. You would have to test these based on your ammunition and load. They would be different based on your bullet weight and velocity. These numbers do not necessarily represent those distances unless you've got this zeroed exceptionally well. Now let us take a look at the inner workings of the Henry rifle. There are two side plates on this brass receiver, one on the right, one on the left. They are retained with one screw. This is the same screw that acts as the pivot pin for not only the lifting lever, but the lever itself. Please note that. So, to take the gun apart, we only need to actually take one side of these two brass plates off. To do so, you get an appropriate screwdriver head size, and turn this screw only as much as you need to free the left side plate. If you take it out only enough, you can actually leave the lifting lever and the lever itself in place without having to disassemble that. Once you have the screw off, you can see that the right side plate merely comes loose. Please note, these edges on the side plates are extremely sharp, as in razor sharp. These will cut you instantly. Be very careful for these dovetail edges that fit into the receiver. They are very finely machined and very sharp. Very dangerous. Once that plate is off, you can then get into the internals of the gun. You can see here, this is one side of the toggle locking system that keeps the bolt in battery. By running the action, the toggle moves and functions the gun. So let's go through that cycle of actions. In this instance, the gun is unloaded. There is no round in here, but let's imagine there's one in the magazine. The lifter is down, the lifting lever is down as a result, and the lifter itself is in line with the tubular magazine, and the bolt is shut. The toggle lock is in battery, and that the knee is locked forward. Bringing the lever down brings the bolt back by bringing that toggle lock action to the rear. At the same time, it cocks the hammer. You can see that the lifting lever is now lifting the lifter, which would then put a round aligned with the barrel chamber. Closing the lever brings the toggle lock and the bolt forward, drops the lifter and the lifting lever out of the way, and goes into battery, which is a safe condition at this point to fire the gun by this knee joint keeping the bolt shut when the gun is fired. Repeating this process does the same thing over and over again. There are two springs that impinge upon the lever and the lifter on the right and left side of the receiver respectively. If you are firing smokeless ammunition, you will probably never need to go in here to clean this action. A little bit of oil will keep it running for a very long time. If you're using black powder or some sort of corrosive ammunition, you will need to take these side plates off, because even with 4440, you will get blow-by of corrosive salts into your receiver, and you'll want to clean that out. To return the side plate back to its original condition, merely slide it in place, align it with the screw, turn it over, tap it slightly, and then just tighten it down. That is the extent of any field servicing you would ever need to do with your Henry repeating rifle, besides, of course, cleaning the barrel. Two things you may want to consider if you're trying to make the gun work to the best of its possible capabilities are these screws here, here, and here. These two screws are the screws that impinge upon the lever springs on the lever and the lifter. By lightening these or loosening them, you can actually make this action smoother to run. If you loosen these too much, you will actually lose parts inside the receiver of the gun. You need to do this very judiciously. So very carefully, loosen it up and tighten it accordingly until this action is as smooth as you wish it to be. This screw applies tension upon the main spring for the hammer. Loosening that will actually make your trigger pull lighter, because you're impinging upon that spring when you're pulling the trigger. Loosening this too much could also cause a malfunction, and that parts could come loose in the gun. And loosening too much could also mean that you do not have enough hammer tension to detonate your primer. So also be careful with that manipulation. The Henry was intended to be a military rifle, and as a result, the majority of them do have sling swivels. The original 1860 Henry rifle sling was a leather sling or strap with a hook on the end, on the fixed swivel, and a button on the rear for the dynamic swivel. It's interesting to note that there are many modern slings that fall right into that paradigm. This is a Set-Me leather sling for the Set-Me series of rifles, or HK series of rifles, with an HK mash hook. The mash hook will simply clip right onto the fixed sling swivel near the front of the barrel, and your button hook can go right on the rear as you would with any other rifle, and you now have a sling on your rifle. I would recommend the HK style mash hook on your 1860 Henry repeating rifle replica, as it is better than the original. The original hook did not latch on securely and would come loose at the worst possible moments. So that mash hook works very well. And it's interesting to note that an HK sling or a Set-Me sling with an HK mash hook fits the 1860 Henry repeating rifle extraordinarily well. There are other accessories you may want to consider for your Henry rifle. A simple wood dowel with a screw and a head cut off of it can reduce the need, or actually remediate, the Henry hop with the follower on your left hand near the receiver. However, at the expense of ammunition capacity. If you were to load the rifle to only 10 rounds, losing 3 rounds, 10 plus 1 with 1 in the chamber, and then replace the empty space that would have been taken up by those 3 extra rounds with the wooden dowel, the screw pointed downwards toward the receiver, and then closing the action. This means that that screw head will actually hit the edge of the receiver and prevent you from having to move your hand while cycling through all 10 rounds. So you've lost capacity, but you've remediated the need to be able to move your hand or be required to move your hand to reduce the chance of a malfunction by impeding the follower. You can easily make your own speed loading devices for your 1860 Henry rifle. This is a simple piece of PVC pipe that's been cut to the appropriate length. One cap has been glued on, one is loose. This is filled with 13 rounds of ammunition. Merely pull the cap off, open your magazine on your Henry like you would if you were to load by hand. Keep your 45-degree angle, run the tube in front, and you have now fully loaded your 1860 Henry. As you can tell, that is much faster than doing it by single cartridges at a time, and a couple of these PVC pipes in a little satchel or something. Other feeding systems for your Henry could be a simple pouch on your belt, which has loose ammunition in it. This can be very fast. The problem with this is when the rounds are pointing the wrong way and you pull them out. As you get them in your hand, if you have a jumble of rounds like this, it is sometimes hard to make sure you align them properly in the magazine tube before dropping them in. The tried but true cartridge belt really is one of the best answers. Putting this on gives you a number of rounds of ammunition quickly accessible to you to fast reload your Henry rifle. We hope you found this operator's guide to the 1860 Henry repeating rifle very helpful. Whether your goals are competition, self-defense, or just fun, hopefully this video was informational and lets you get the best capabilities out of your Henry and its application. If you like this type of content, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Patreon is truly what keeps InRangeTV alive and allows us to produce content like this for you. If you can't support us on Patreon, we totally understand. Please just subscribe to both our channels on Full30 and YouTube. Keep track of us on Facebook and share the video with your friends. Thank you very much.